We know that this is about power to you. And you want to know what we know. And one day, you will.
This is about power to you. What does this mean? Thank you so much for this question. I like it so much. I'm going to dedicate a whole video to it because it coincides with some research I've been doing recently. So generally speaking, there are 4 different types of serial killers, and these types are based on their motivations. So these 4 types are visionary, mission-oriented, hedonistic, and power/control. So with your visionary killer, this is the first main type. This individual believes that a person or entity is commanding him to kill, most likely suffering from psychosis. So these people are a lot less organized. This is like your David Berkowitz, Son of Sam, the devil made me do it kind of killer. And then we have our mission-oriented killer. This is someone who kills in order to rid society of a certain group. So think like killers who may target women or sex workers, that kind of killer. They're, focused on a certain group that they want to rid society from. Hedonistic, this is somebody who commits his acts for his own personal pleasure. For example, rape, torture, or money. For me, this is like Jeffrey Dahmer, somebody who's committing these crimes for their own pleasure and gratification. And then we have the power and control killer. This is somebody who fantasizes about having power and seeks to dominate and control his victims. So kind of delving a little bit more into the power and control serial killer. So this is one of the most common types. This killer seeks to dominate their victims, and in a lot of cases, these men have feelings of inadequacy and powerlessness and are afraid of rejection. Many of them who were also abused as children. Dominating their victims and taking away their lives gives them a feeling of empowerment. These kinds of serial killers are often calm, meticulous, and patient. They also tend to be organized. Although they may sexually assault their victims, this is not done for sexual pleasure. Unlike lust killers, this is the hedonistic kind of killer, the power control killer uses sexual assault as a tool to exert power and control over their victims. It is the act of dominating someone and taking away their choice that gives them a high. Even after the act of murder is done, the power and control killer may continue to control his victim. For example, he might return to the body and mutilate it further. He might also engage in necrophilia. The act of keeping souvenirs that remind them of their victims is also common. For example, the killer could take photographs of his victims or keep pieces of their jewelry. A souvenir allows the killer to relive the crime and fantasize about it. It also acts as a badge or token. In other words, it represents the life they took. He might even give this piece of jewelry to his partner and claim that he purchased it or found it. By doing this, he is essentially manipulating his partner into wearing something that he took from his victim. That's very interesting. There's a really good piece I'll link in the description. It's from Psychology Today, and it's called Serial Homicide for Power and Control. So I just want to read this to you. It gives some good examples and kind of contextualizes some of what we've been talking about. So all serial killers have a compulsion to kill, but their individual motivations may vary. Some killers are driven by hedonistic lust. Others are motivated by greed or thrill-seeking needs. Perhaps the most common type of serial killer is the power and control killer. Classic examples of this type include Gary Ridgway, John Wayne Gacy, I have a video on him if you're interested, and Dennis Rader, which is the BTK killer. The primary motivation of these serial killers is to control and dominate their victims. They enjoy the process of murder. That is, they enjoy stalking, capturing, and torturing their prey. They find it sexually arousing, but the act of murder is normally the most satisfying and final expression of their power and control over their victims. They are patient, and they kill their victims slowly in order to prolong their own sadistic pleasure. Such behavior is empowering because their killer gets to decide when and how and under what circumstances his victims die. Dennis Rader, aka Bind, Torture, Kill, or BTK, is a leading example of this type of serial killer. In a twisted mind such as that of BTK, a prolonged torture and killing can become the only means to quench his otherwise insatiable thirst for power and control. The story of BTK is incredible. He murdered at least 10 people in Wichita, Kansas over a 20-year period prior to his capture in 2005. He pled guilty and received 10 consecutive life sentences. Prior to his arrest, Rader was married for 34 years with 2 children, a Boy Scout leader, employed as a local government official, and was the president of his church congregation. His alter ego, BTK, on the other hand, was a stone-cold killer who sought power, control, and domination of his victims. The torture of his victims gratified BTK, and strangling the life out of them made him feel like God. Throughout the years that he was committing his murders, Rader lived a remarkably normal-looking outward life, and he was perceived to be a pillar of his community. Hiding in plain sight, you could say. Inwardly, however, BTK was secretly satisfying his sexual needs and delaying his compulsion to kill for months and even years at a time through autoerotic fantasies combined with masturbation, in which he relived his murders with the aid of trophies taken from his victims. Power and control killers are frequently stone-cold psychopaths, and they fall into the FBI's organized category of predators because they are meticulous planners and patient. Such serial killers are frequently charming, charismatic, and intelligent. Many power and control killers sexually assault their victims, but unlike hedonistic lust killers, for them, rape is not motivated by lust. Instead, rape is another means of dominating and controlling their victims. Power and control killers do not necessarily lose interest in their victims after they are dead, as thrill killers such as the Zodiac do. Sometimes a power and control killer will return to have sex with the decomposing corpse of a victim long after the murder in order to perpetuate his domination and control of the deceased. Because necrophilia totally eliminates the possibility of unwanted rejection, the power and control killer can return to violate the victim whenever he pleases. This affords a psychopathic serial killer with a tremendous sense of empowerment while avoiding the disturbing prospect of rejection and disappointment by a living person. Voracious post-mortem sexual behavior was manifested by Ted Bundy and Ed Kemper, for example, who were both power and control killers. Many power and control serial killers also keep souvenirs or trophies from their crimes, which serve to sustain and refuel their violent and sexual fantasies. When Ted Bundy was asked why he took Polaroid photos of his victims, he said, "When you work hard to do something right, you don't want to forget it." The former FBI profiler John Douglas has said that keeping mementos from a victim, such as a lock of hair, jewelry, ID card, or a newspaper clipping of the crime, helps to prolong and even nourish the serial killer's secret fantasy. In between their murders and while targeting future victims, serial killers often take out their trophies to help them relive past murders through fantasy. Trophies help a prolific killer such as Bundy to recall each one of his many victims. Similarly, Dennis Rader kept a locked treasure chest of trophies in the basement of his home, which helped him to prolong and heighten his autoerotic fantasy life as he recalled each one of his victims.
We know that this is about power to you. But the difference now between now and day one is we know about you. A lot about you. Today could be the day. Sleep well.
Watching, and we'll meet them soon. And I couldn't help but notice you glanced at the camera as though you may have been looking at the killer. What makes you think that they're watching?
Well, I think that even though we're at the 5-year mark, I still believe, even today, that he knows what's happening. He knows what's happening nationally. He knows what's happening locally. He knows who's covering the story and what's being said, and very likely he's even going to be watching this interview tonight.
And when you look at a crime like this, where there's predatory behavior involved, and predatory behavior means hunting behavior, hunting for victims, that suggests to me that one of the motives, and maybe the primary motive, was sexual in nature. But of course, we have to keep in mind always that crimes have multiple motivations for them. Thrill and excitement could have been another one. The power and control over two human beings, yet again another one.
What's interesting as well is that motivations can change actually during the scene itself. So if victims react to the offender in a way that he did not anticipate, then his motivation may be different to, okay, now I have to overcome this victim. I have to take back control from this victim.
But I would say right now, based on what I know about this crime, that sex would be a motivation. This person, he takes them to an area around in the woods by the water that really is very remote, which suggests some planning and thinking ahead of time.
We know that this is about power to you. And you want to know what we know. And one day, you will.